My name is Susanne Medas, and my maiden name was Bernstein. And I was born in Berlin in 1923, so I'm actually 90 years old now. And I suppose my childhood up to the age of 10 was quite a normal childhood. My father was political editor of the newspaper called Vorwärts, which was the Social Democrat paper. And of course, he did what most of the editors did, get out of the country as quickly as possible as Hitler came to power. My brother, who was 8 years older than myself, had come to England in 1938, and I guess that my mother, not realizing that there was this arrangement, got in touch with my brother and asked him to find a family in Cambridge for me. And when we got to Liverpool Street, we were taken to what looked like a drill hall, if you like. Maybe it was a waiting room. And there we were sitting with our labels round our necks. And although I understood later that the labels just had a number, for some reason I had a feeling that on my label it said Cambridge. You know, if you can imagine 250 children arriving by train, and there are all these foster people who, of course, don't speak German, and the children don't speak English and all of that. The people who offered to take children didn't necessarily know how old this child would be. They were away on their honeymoon when I arrived on the 1st of July 1939 in Prague. So I couldn't go to them. They lived in Girton. But the first maybe 2 weeks or so of my time in Cambridge, I had a wonderful time with a family called Lauterpacht. And this was an international lawyer married to a Palestinian lady, very cultured woman who spoke German. And there was a son of theirs who didn't particularly enjoy my arriving in the household. First of all, he was about 11 and I was nearly 16, and he couldn't understand how a 16-year-old couldn't speak English. I mean, he really looked down his nose at me. And then he was detailed to show me Cambridge, and I'm sure he didn't enjoy walking around Cambridge with me. But anyhow, apart from that, it was very pleasant. And then this honeymoon couple arrived, and now you can imagine how embarrassing it was for them and for me. They were probably hoping for a sweet little 2-year-old or 3-year-old so they could play mummies and daddies. Instead of which there was this galumphing female looking at them. And I realized quite soon that it really was an impossible situation. And although I don't think that they would have gone to the committee and said, we don't want this girl, I don't think so. But as I was old enough, luckily, and I knew there was a refugees committee, and so I went to Greta Burkill of the refugees committee in her house and told her about this, and she found me another family. Greta Burkill was unique, absolutely. I went to Greta Burkill, who kept open house for all and sundry. And I think there was never a time, I doubt if there was a day, when she didn't have either some of the people who came on domestic permits or one of the children. And she just had a big heart. She herself was German. And I don't know if it must have been our very first time together, when she, realizing that my surname is Bernstein, she asked me whether by any chance I knew someone called Richard Bernstein. Richard Bernstein was my father. And when I told her that, she said, but I am Greta Burkill, but I was Greta Brown. And my father, Alfred Brown, I think it was, taught your father journalism. How about that for a coincidence? And after that, she really couldn't do enough for me. Now, the one thing that Mrs. Burkill will certainly be known for was that she was determined that the children, the teenagers who were in her care, would continue to have the type of education that they would have had in Germany, Austria, or Czechoslovakia. And she had access to both the purse and the lease. Her husband was a Don at Peterhouse mathematician, and she offered all these children whether they would like to go to the purse or the lease. And I'm happy to say that 99% of these children did do exactly that, but not Susanne Bernstein, because Susanne Bernstein was afraid that as she knew no English, she would be put in with the 14-year-olds, as would have been the custom in Czechoslovakia, maybe in Germany too. It's not the custom in this country. They just get extra help, don't they? And I said, oh, I don't want to go to school. I want to earn my living, please. Mrs. Burkill, who perhaps with hindsight should have said, look here, my girl, I'm here in loco parentis, so go to school you will. But she didn't do that. That wasn't her way. I said to Mrs. Burkill, I want to do beauty culture. So she went to Eden Lilly, and she came back and said, I'm very sorry, they don't do beauty culture at Eden Lilly. You could become a hairdresser. Well, I wasn't going to do that either. So I said, no, thank you, not hairdressing. And I don't know what made me say I want to be a teacher. Okay. Mrs. Burkill had a good connection with Homerton College. So she went to Homerton, and she not only spoke to Miss Davis, but also to the principal called Miss Skillicorn, whether Miss Skillicorn would be prepared to take this girl. And, well, what can I say? There were about 300 girls for a 2-year training course, and they had to be 18. They had to know English, of course, and they had to have the then school certificate. And I was 16 and a half, I knew hardly any English, and I certainly hadn't got a school certificate. But I think that, and I think most people of my generation who were here at that time would perhaps agree with me, that people panicked when war broke out and didn't think ahead to the future. Thought in 6 months we'll all be dead, you know. After all, they had witnessed the occupation of all the countries in Central Europe. And so Miss Skillicorn agreed to take me. So I had 2 terms, as it were, and by this time I knew English, and I liked it, and I was enjoying life in Cambridge. And at the end of my first year, when I was hoping to go on to the second year and then to getting my teacher certificate, which would have enabled me to earn my living, Miss Skillicorn, the end of the summer term, called me to the study and informed me that I had to leave. I didn't know why. What had I done? Was my work not good enough? And she then had to confess that I did not exist on any list. She could not let me stay on and take the final exam. And so unfortunately, I wasn't qualified. This couple, they were called Mr. and Mrs. Boyle. They had no children of their own. They'd adopted a couple, boy and girl, and sent them to Canada, as a lot of people did. But I stayed on with them. And one of my memories of living in that house was that it was sort of traditional, I don't know if it was semi-detached probably, and 3 bedrooms upstairs kind of house. And the children were old enough to make the early morning cup of tea for their parents. And now they were asked to make a cup of tea for me as well. They made this cup of tea with milk in it, which I couldn't bear, nobody drinks tea with milk where I come from. And and I didn't, even though I wasn't really shy, but somehow I didn't know how to tell these people, I don't want this tea with milk. So what did I do? I listened until the children were back in their room and until the parents, presumably, enjoying their cup of tea in bed. And then I crept along the passage and poured this tea down the loo. And I must have done that quite often. But they didn't say anything, I didn't say anything, and I wish they were still around because I bet they knew perfectly well and they didn't know how to handle that situation either. But I did go back to see Mrs. Burkill, and that was many years later when she and Charles, her husband, they were pensioners, and they were living in this sort of care home for people from Peterhouse. And that was the time when Greta Burkill, remembering all these people whom she had helped to have a proper education, who had become scientists and doctors and professors, and she reeled off all their names, you see. And I sort of stopped her in the middle and said, well, I'm the black sheep here, you didn't succeed with me. And that was the last time I saw them both. That was nice to see them again. Imperial Museum near Elephant Castle. I went there some years ago, and they have these phones. Have you been there? And you can listen to things. And I picked up one of these phones. I don't know what made me do it. And there was Greta Burkill's voice. And she was talking about, what she had done in Cambridge. That was so lovely. I asked them if I could have a copy, but they didn't give me one. But if you can get one for me, please try.